Margaret Maggie Thompson had been serving coffee and comfort to Marines for over 12 years at the small diner just outside Camp Pendleton. Every morning at 5:30, she would unlock the doors to Sunrise Diner, tie her graying hair back in a neat bun, and prepare for the steady stream of young men and women in uniform who had become like family to her. The diner wasn't much to look at from the outside. Paint peeled from its yellow walls, and the neon sign flickered on cold mornings. But inside, it was warm and welcoming, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and bacon. Maggie had worked there since she was 42, after her husband died in a car accident, leaving her to raise their teenage son alone. At 54, Maggie moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had poured thousands of cups of coffee and served countless plates of eggs and toast. Her weathered hands told stories of hard work, but her eyes still sparkled with kindness. She remembered every regular's name, their coffee preferences, and often asked about their families back home. The Marines loved her. To them, she wasn't just a waitress. She was a mother figure, a listening ear, and sometimes the only friendly face they saw all day during tough training periods. When new recruits arrived, nervous and homesick, the older Marines would tell them about Maggie. "She'll take care of you," they'd say, "just like your mom would." Maggie had her own way of showing she cared. She never charged extra for second helpings, always remembered birthdays with a free slice of pie, and kept a box of tissues behind the counter for those difficult conversations about deployments or lost comrades. When Marines deployed overseas, she would send care packages filled with homemade cookies and handwritten notes. Her own son, David, had joined the Army right after high school, and Maggie understood the worry that kept military mothers awake at night. She saw that same concern in the young faces that filled her diner, and she did her best to ease their fears with a warm meal and a kind word. On busy mornings, when the diner was packed with Marines grabbing breakfast before training exercises, Maggie would weave between tables with impressive skill, carrying multiple plates on each arm, never spilling a drop of coffee or forgetting an order. Her customers often joked that she must have radar, the way she could sense when someone needed a refill or an extra napkin. The relationship between Maggie and the Marines was special. They treated her with deep respect, always standing when she approached their table for the first time each day, and many would spend extra time talking with her about their lives, their fears, and their dreams. She became a keeper of their stories, a safe person who would listen without judgment. Some Marines had been coming to the diner for years, and Maggie had watched them grow from scared 18-year-olds into confident leaders. She celebrated their promotions with free breakfast and worried about them during dangerous deployments. When they returned safely, her face would light up like a proud mother's. The diner walls were covered with photos and postcards from Marines stationed around the world. Each one was addressed to Mom Maggie or Our Guardian Angel. She treasured these mementos and would often read them aloud to new customers, explaining the stories behind each one. Maggie's routine rarely changed. She arrived early, stayed late, and worked 6 days a week. Sunday was her only day off, which she usually spent attending church and visiting her son David, who now lived nearby with his own family. Her grandchildren loved hearing stories about the brave Marines their grandmother served. Despite the long hours and physical demands of the job, Maggie genuinely loved her work. She found purpose in caring for these young service members, knowing that her kindness might be the bright spot in someone's difficult day. The diner owner, Mr. Chen, often worried that she was working too hard for her age, but Maggie always brushed off his concerns with a laugh and a wave. The Marines had become her extended family, and the diner was more than a workplace. It was her second home. She knew every corner of the building, every quirk of the old coffee machine, and exactly how to arrange the tables to accommodate the largest groups during busy periods. As winter approached, Maggie noticed she had been feeling more tired than usual. She attributed it to the longer hours during the busy season and the stress of the holiday rush. Several Marines had commented that she looked pale, but she reassured them that she was fine, just a little worn out from the extra work. Unknown to everyone, including herself, Maggie had been experiencing subtle symptoms for weeks. Occasional dizziness when she stood up quickly, moments of unusual fatigue, and a persistent ache in her chest that she dismissed as muscle strain from carrying heavy trays. She was determined not to worry anyone, especially her young Marines, who already carried enough burdens of their own. Tuesday morning started like any other day at Sunrise Diner. The November air was crisp, and Maggie could see her breath as she unlocked the front door at 5:30 sharp. She flipped on the lights, started the coffee machine, and began her familiar routine of preparing for the breakfast rush. By 6:15, the diner was already half full with Marines grabbing quick meals before their morning training exercises. Maggie moved between tables with her usual grace, greeting each customer by name and remembering their regular orders. The atmosphere was lively but respectful, filled with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, a regular for 3 years, noticed that Maggie seemed different that morning. She moved a little slower than usual and had to steady herself against a table when she stood up from wiping it down. When he asked if she was feeling all right, she gave him her characteristic warm smile and assured him she was just fine. The morning rush intensified around 7 o'clock when a large group of nearly 50 Marines arrived for breakfast before a major training exercise. Maggie welcomed the challenge, as she always did. She loved the energy of a full diner and took pride in her ability to handle even the busiest mornings with efficiency and grace. As she balanced 3 plates on her left arm and carried a coffee pot in her right hand, heading toward a table of young recruits, Maggie felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over her. She paused for a moment, trying to regain her composure, but the feeling only grew stronger. The room seemed to spin slightly, and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Private Johnson, sitting at the nearest table, noticed her hesitation. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, with genuine concern in his voice. Maggie tried to respond, but her words came out unclear and shaky. She attempted to take another step forward, but her legs suddenly felt weak and unsteady. The coffee pot slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor and sending hot coffee splashing across the tiles. The plates followed, shattering loudly in the sudden silence that fell over the diner. Maggie's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed, her body hitting the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the shocked silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the entire diner erupted into organized action. These Marines, trained to respond quickly in emergencies, immediately shifted into rescue mode. Corporal Martinez, who had some medical training, was the first to reach Maggie. He knelt beside her, quickly checking for a pulse while calling out instructions to the others. "Someone call 911, clear some space around her. I need room to work." Private Thompson immediately pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. His voice calm and professional as he provided the dispatcher with clear information about their location and Maggie's condition. Other Marines quickly moved tables and chairs to create an open area around where she lay. Sergeant Williams took charge of crowd control, gently but firmly asking the civilian customers to give the medical team space while ensuring that nobody left without paying their bills. He knew Maggie would worry about that later. Staff Sergeant Davis positioned himself near the door to watch for the ambulance. Corporal Martinez carefully checked Maggie's breathing and found that while she was unconscious, her vital signs seemed stable. He spoke to her in a gentle voice, hoping she could hear him. "Maggie, it's Martinez. You're going to be okay. We're taking care of you now. The ambulance is on the way." Several Marines who knew Maggie well gathered around, their faces etched with worry. These tough, battle-ready soldiers looked vulnerable as they watched their beloved mom Maggie lying motionless on the diner floor. Some quietly prayed, others held back tears, and all felt helpless despite their training. Private First Class Garcia, who had been coming to the diner for over a year, knelt down and gently took Maggie's hand. "Come on, Maggie," he whispered. "We need you to wake up. You've got to be okay." When the paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, they found a scene of organized concern. The Marines had maintained perfect order, keeping the area clear while staying close enough to show their support. The paramedics were impressed by how well the situation had been managed and how much these young service members clearly cared about the injured woman. As the paramedics worked to stabilize Maggie and load her onto a stretcher, more Marines continued to arrive at the diner. Word had spread quickly through the base about what had happened, and soldiers who knew and loved Maggie began showing up to see if they could help or get updates on her condition. The ambulance pulled away with Maggie inside, its sirens wailing as it headed toward the base hospital. But instead of dispersing, the Marines remained at the diner. Without being asked or organized by anyone in authority, they began working together to clean up the broken dishes and spilled coffee. They moved tables back into position and made sure the diner was exactly as Maggie would want to find it. Mr. Chen, the diner owner, arrived within the hour after receiving a phone call from Sergeant Williams. He was amazed to find not chaos, but a diner full of Marines who had appointed themselves as temporary caretakers of Maggie's workplace. Some were serving coffee to other customers, others were taking orders, and several were cleaning every surface until it sparkled. Throughout the morning, Marines continued to arrive, asking for updates and wanting to help in any way possible. The diner had never been so full, yet so quiet. These tough warriors sat in small groups, drinking coffee and sharing stories about Maggie, about how she had touched their lives, and about the small kindnesses she had shown them over the years. By afternoon, nearly 200 Marines had passed through the diner to show their support and concern. They left money in a large coffee can that someone had labeled "for Maggie," contributing whatever they could to help with her medical expenses. The can quickly overflowed with bills and coins, evidence of how much she meant to them. Word of Maggie's collapse spread throughout Camp Pendleton faster than wildfire. By evening, Marines from different units were calling their buddies to check if they had heard about the woman who had collapsed while serving at Sunrise Diner. For many who had never met her personally, the name meant nothing. But when older Marines explained who she was, the response was always the same: concern, respect, and a desire to help. At the base hospital, doctors determined that Maggie had suffered from severe exhaustion combined with dangerously low blood pressure, likely caused by months of overwork and not taking proper care of herself. She had been pushing her body beyond its limits, ignoring warning signs because she didn't want to let down the Marines who depended on her daily dose of warmth and care. When Maggie woke up the next morning, she found her hospital room filled with flowers, cards, and small gifts from Marines. The nurses told her that they had been receiving deliveries every hour since the previous afternoon. Her bedside table was covered with handwritten notes, each one expressing gratitude and wishing her a speedy recovery. Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to visit during official visiting hours. He sat beside her bed with tears in his eyes, holding her hand gently. "Maggie," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you scared us. You can't do that again, okay? We need you around." Over the next few days, a steady stream of Marines visited Maggie in the hospital. Some she knew well, others she had served only a few times, but each one came to express their gratitude and concern. They brought stories of how her kindness had impacted their lives, sharing memories she had forgotten, but they had treasured. Private Johnson, who had been present when she collapsed, told her how her encouraging words during his first week of training had kept him from quitting. Staff Sergeant Williams shared how her homemade cookies and care packages had lifted his spirits during a difficult deployment in Afghanistan. Each story revealed the profound impact that Maggie's simple acts of kindness had made on these young lives. The doctors insisted that Maggie stay in the hospital for a full week for observation and rest. During this time, something extraordinary was happening back at the base. Marines from different units, most of whom had never spoken to each other before, were coming together to plan something special for Maggie's return to the diner. Colonel Harrison, the base commander, had heard about Maggie's situation and was moved by the outpouring of support from his Marines. When a group of senior non-commissioned officers approached him with an unusual request, he listened carefully and then gave his enthusiastic approval. The plan was ambitious and required coordination across multiple units. Master Sergeant Thompson took charge of organizing the logistics, while Sergeant Major Davis handled communications. They wanted to ensure that when Maggie returned to work, she would understand just how much she meant to the Marine community. Meanwhile, Mr. Chen had made the difficult decision to close the diner temporarily while Maggie recovered. However, Marines continued to show up every day, helping with maintenance, painting the walls, and making small improvements. They installed a new coffee machine, repaired the wobbly tables, and even planted flowers in boxes outside the windows. When Maggie was finally released from the hospital, her son David drove her home with strict instructions from the doctors to rest for at least another week before returning to work. She protested, worried about Mr. Chen and the diner, but David assured her that everything was being taken care of. The following Monday morning, exactly 2 weeks after her collapse, Maggie was finally cleared to return to work. David offered to drive her, but she insisted on walking the familiar route to the diner, eager to return to her routine and see her Marine family again. As she approached the diner, Maggie noticed something unusual. There were far more Marines than normal gathered in the parking area and along the street. They stood in perfect formation, wearing their dress blue uniforms instead of the casual fatigues she was used to seeing at breakfast time. Confused but curious, Maggie walked closer. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward from the group, also in full dress uniform, and approached her with a formal bearing she had never seen from him before. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, using her formal name for the first time ever, "on behalf of the United States Marine Corps and every service member you have served and cared for over the past 12 years, we would like to honor you today." At his signal, 500 Marines who had gathered from across the base snapped to attention in perfect unison. The sound of their synchronized movement was like thunder in the quiet morning air. Then, as one, they raised their hands in crisp military salutes, holding the position with unwavering precision. Maggie stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sight before her. Row after row of Marines in immaculate uniforms, their faces serious and respectful, all saluting her with the same honor they would show to a commanding officer or fallen hero. The morning sun reflected off their brass buttons and polished shoes, creating a scene of breathtaking military pageantry. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his own salute crisp and proud. "Mrs. Thompson," he said in a voice that carried across the silent gathering, "you have served these Marines with dedication, kindness, and love for over a decade. You have been a mother, a friend, and a source of comfort to thousands of young men and women far from home. Today, we honor your service to our Corps and to our country." The salute continued for a full minute, though it felt like an eternity to Maggie, who stood with tears streaming down her cheeks. She had never felt so honored, so appreciated, or so overwhelmed with emotion. These brave warriors who had seen combat and faced dangers she could barely imagine were saluting her, a simple diner waitress who had done nothing more than serve coffee and show kindness. When the salute finally ended, the formal atmosphere dissolved into something much more familiar. Marines broke ranks and surrounded Maggie, hugging her carefully, shaking her hand, and expressing their relief that she was feeling better. The parking lot filled with laughter, conversation, and the kind of warmth that had always characterized her relationship with these young service members. Inside the diner, Maggie discovered that the Marines had decorated every surface with welcome back banners, balloons, and more flowers. A large poster signed by hundreds of Marines hung behind the counter with messages of gratitude and love covering every inch. As the morning progressed, Marines continued to arrive for breakfast, but the atmosphere was different now. There was a new level of appreciation, a deeper understanding of how precious these daily interactions really were. Maggie noticed that the younger Marines seemed to stand a little straighter when they spoke to her, and the older ones lingered a bit longer over their coffee, as if they didn't want to take these moments for granted anymore. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the ceremony, complete with photographs of the remarkable scene. The article spread across social media, touching hearts around the world and reminding people of the power of simple human kindness. Maggie returned to her regular routine, but with a new understanding of her own importance and a promise to take better care of herself. The Marines, meanwhile, had learned something valuable about expressing gratitude while they still had the chance. The ceremony had honored Maggie, but it had also reminded everyone present that heroes come in many forms, and sometimes the most important service happens not on battlefields, but in small diners where love is served alongside coffee and eggs. The coffee can marked for Maggie had grown into a substantial fund that helped with her medical bills and provided her with a small financial cushion for the first time in years. More importantly, the experience had strengthened the bond between Maggie and her Marine family in ways that would last forever. Every morning now, when Maggie unlocked the doors to Sunrise Diner, she remembered that moment when 500 Marines stood in formation to honor her service. It reminded her that no act of kindness is too small, and that the love we give to others has the power to come back to us in ways we never expect.